Welcome to Go Green Radio, everyone. I'm really excited you could join us. Our guest today is the author of a brand new book called I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You: How to Depolarize Your Family, Business, Country, and the World. For over 3 decades, James Twyman has been a global force for peace, leading millions of people in synchronized peace meditations across the world. As a New York Times bestselling author, he has written 24 books, including The Moses Code, and recorded 22 music albums selling over 350,000 copies. Beyond his work as an author and musician, James is also a filmmaker, having directed or produced 7 feature films, including award-winning Redwood Highway. Now, James is turning his focus to one of the most urgent challenges of our time: the deep polarization dividing families, businesses, and nations. And his latest book, I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You: How to Depolarize Your Family, Business, Country, and the World, is more than a call to awareness, it's a movement. With a mission to mobilize millions as depolarizing agents, James is dedicated to bridging divides, fostering understanding, and healing the fractures that threaten our global community. Welcome to Go Green Radio, James. So glad to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Jill. Thank you so much.
Well, a lot of our listeners are feeling exactly what you just described, this polarization. And so I want to start by asking you, why can a movement of depolarization help heal the divides that are tearing our society apart right now?
Well, first of all, I think we can all agree that something needs to happen, no matter what side we find ourselves on or what our opinions are. It's easy to recognize that we have come to an impasse as a country, as a society, that we have been pulled in opposite directions for so long, the rubber band is getting ready to snap. And before that happens, if we can find a way to remind ourselves that we have more in common than we have different. Well, actually, we begin to remember some of the lessons that we learned in kindergarten, that we need to be kind, we need to be respectful. This movement you're talking about is so simple because it really is a return to those values. So I think we can all agree that something needs to happen. And if that something can be as simple as whatever side we find ourselves on, just being reminded that we all want the same thing, which is to get along a little bit better. Maybe we can begin to manifest that.
I love that. I'm excited to dive in deeper and learn more because that's exactly what so many of us want. What inspired you to write the book? I don't know. Maybe I love you.
Well, we all remember COVID, and it started during a conversation that I had with my younger brother around the beginning of COVID. And I don't even remember what we were arguing about. My younger brother, ever since he was a kid, just loves to outdo me. And so we're going on about something, and I think he was winning the argument. So I said 3 things to him. I said, Kenny, I don't know. Maybe I love you, man. And he said
Mm.
later, I hate when you do that. How can I keep the argument going when you say that? I realized, wow, he's right. You can't keep the argument going when there's no one pushing back. When
Mhm.
when we just realize first, and this is the beginning, I don't know. I have my opinion, you have your opinion, but none of us know for sure. So maybe if I begin there and listen to you and said, well, maybe there's something that I can learn here. And at the very foundation of it all, to know that the only thing that's important is for us to have love and compassion for one another, no matter what we think, no matter what our beliefs are, no matter what side we find ourselves on. So it began with that simple conversation. I began talking about this in different talks and lectures that I was giving, and it seemed to really stick. People would be talking about it days later. I would overhear a conversation, and someone would say, "Ah, I don't know, maybe I love you," and I thought there's something here.
Yeah.
But at that point, I'd written 23 books, and I'd kind of said to myself, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've written enough. But one of the things that I love to do, because I am a Franciscan, an Episcopal priest, and I was getting ready to go on a tour on the East Coast, performing a one-man musical that I
Mm,
perform on the life of Saint Francis. And I was in New Hampshire, and a friend of mine named Walt had sponsored an event, and I went out to dinner with Walt and his wife Anne. And in the discussion, I learned that Anne has her own publishing company, medium-sized, very good publishing company called Summit Publishers. And I said, I'm never going to write another book, but if I did, this would be the one. And I told
hmm.
her the story about my brother and my feeling that we need a movement of depolarization. And she said, if you write that book, I will publish it. So I said, okay, I guess I'm writing the book. And I started that night. I was traveling in my little camper van. I went to the van that night, started writing. And then along this journey, I just began meeting people and talking to people, some of whom agreed with me, some of whom did not agree with me, and just listening them and putting these principles of depolarization into practice. And so the book became a road trip as I met all these interesting people and just did my own best to try to depolarize my own mind, which is the key. It's not about
Hmm.
changing anybody else, it's about changing my mind. And in doing so, watching how that would affect others and ultimately affect the whole world.
I love it. And the book is so accessible. You're such a good storyteller. I was flipping pages as fast as I could because I really did enjoy the way that you laid out the stories and brought the lessons to the forefront as you did that. James, are you able to identify the root cause of the polarization that we're experiencing in the world today? A lot of people are wondering this, like, where did all this come from?
I believe I can identify it, and it's the pandemic, but not the pandemic that we think. It's not the COVID pandemic. It's what I call the pandemic of being right.
Mm.
Everyone wants to be right. And in our rightness, our assertion that I'm right, and if you share my opinion, then you're right as well. But if you don't, well, you're wrong, and I have the right to push you out of my life. And this feeling, this pandemic of being right has increased to the point that people are forcing others out of their homes, their families, their lives, their hearts, because to them, being right is the most important thing. Well, I say being happy is more
Mm.
important than being right. Harmony is more important than division. So we need to confront this. Now, the thing about our modern society, as wonderful as these tools are that we have, they often increase this pandemic. For example, social media, the algorithms in social media and YouTube and other things reinforce this by telling us over and over and over what we already believe. For example, if I am a vaccine denier, for example, and I go to watch a video on YouTube about that, the algorithms say, "Oh, this must be what this person wants because it's what they believe, so I'm going to give them more." And
Mhm.
every time I go to YouTube, I'm going to see clips that are in alignment with what I already believe. And I start to say to myself, well, this must be true. I must be right because all of the authorities I'm seeing here agree with me. But if
Mm.
I had a different opinion, if I was a vaccine supporter, the same thing would happen. Algorithms would only give me what I already believe. And so this reinforces this urgency to be right and to correct people. But like I said, if we just went back to some of the lessons that we learned when we were in kindergarten, this would dissolve on its own because we were taught to be kind to one another, to respect each other's beliefs. But somewhere along the line, in our urgency to be right, we've forgotten this. So these tools of depolarization start with listening to people. And that's why I made the title of the book what I did. I don't know, maybe I love you, because that's the whole formula. To start
Mm-hmm.
with, as I said, I don't know the answer. I think I do. I have my beliefs, but maybe if I listen to you a bit more deeply, maybe I'll learn something. We may not convince each other in the end, but at least we're going to have respect for each other's opinions.
Mm-hmm. Well said. That's very profound. What role do you think politics plays in amplifying the polarized atmosphere that we experience today?
Well, I think that's pretty obvious today, isn't it?
Hmm.
Our political, people on the left and the right are just using, how do I say this? It's like there is this momentum that has been created over the years, and they harness the energy of that momentum because that is how you win elections. You win elections by getting people engaged. You win elections by often getting people angry, by getting people concerned about the issues that you're concerned about, and pushing other people who don't agree with you out of the picture. And it would be wonderful if we could solve this politically, but I don't think it's ultimately a political problem. I also don't even think it's a social problem. We could say that it's a spiritual problem, or that it's really a question of remembering that we're really one. And in the end, we all want the same thing. We want peace in our families, in our hearts, in our countries. We want to get along no matter what our opinions are. I mean, gone are the days where we can sit around the table and say, well, I believe this and you believe that, and we laugh at each other and go on and continue our relationship. For some reason, that seems to have, in many households, shifted. And obviously the politics have played a major part. I remember, for example, when I was driving from Portland, Oregon, in my van all the way to the East Coast to do that tour. I stopped in Minnesota to visit my father. Now, there are very few people who are as different from me than my father is. Uh, he's I'll just say I'm, much more progressive, much more liberal. I supported the Democratic ticket. Well, he's the exact opposite. And he was desperate to get into it with me, really wanting very much to argue with me. And, and I just kept saying, Dad, I'm not going to talk to you about that because all it's going to do is push us apart. And I don't want to be pushed apart from you. And I do admit that there were a couple of times where he triggered me, and I found myself engaged, but then I would pull back. But these political discussions have become so much more than that. They've become a call to arms, you could say. And I think we do need to get back to that time when we can vote the way we choose to vote, believe what we want to believe, but let go of this urgency to be so right and to make everyone else so wrong.
Well said. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we have much more with James. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could join us and so thrilled to have our guest today, James Twyman. He is the author of a brand new book, and he is really trying to start and inspire a depolarization movement. We're all hurting. We all know about divisions that we experience in our workplace, in our families, in so many of our relationships. And his new book, I don't know, maybe I love you, is a great way to start. I really encourage you to get out wherever you buy books and grab a copy because it is really meaningful. James, you say that you want to start a movement of depolarization. What does that mean, or what does that look like in our modern world?
Well, I knew from the very beginning that this was more than a book. I wasn't interested in just writing another book. I wanted to address a situation that we all, I think, is important. And I was reminded of the wonderful quote from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never
Hmm.
think that a small group of people committed cannot change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has." So I
Hmm.
thought, what would happen if we had a group of people, thousands or millions of people, who said, "I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem"? What if we began to learn these tools? For example, one of the tools that we can learn is curiosity. What if we learn to be curious about other people's opinions, their backgrounds, what they think, rather than just immediately jump in and say, "You are wrong because you're thinking different than me"? So if someone were to express an opinion that is different from my own, I, like everyone else, I do feel that energy of stepping in and trying to correct them.
Hmm.
But what I've learned to do is to be curious and say, "Tell me more." And so these are the tools that we're trying to develop and teach so that we can get a movement started. One of the ways that people can join the movement is if they go to our website, which is simply de-polarize.com. So depolarize with a dash. There's a 1 minute long survey they can take that will help us to get more information on how to focus this movement. And that'll be the first step in just getting on to this movement itself, getting on the bandwagon and learning these very simple tools that, once again, as I've said before, we learned in kindergarten. We just need to remember. And this really is not hard. It's just
Hmm.
about letting go of my need, my addiction, really, to being right about something and gathering around me the people who agree with me. This is how we reinforce our rightness. We only
Hmm.
want to have people around us who agree with us these days. I
Hmm.
think it's richer and more vibrant when we can bring people of different opinions, people of different attitudes together. And it reminds us that there's a lot going on here that we may not agree with, but let me give you an example, actually,
Sure.
because as I said before, when I was on this journey, I was driving my van down the East Coast doing this musical on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And I had a few days off and I was in New Jersey. And so I was going to spend them with probably my dearest friend in the whole world. His name is Vicky. And anyone who knows Vicky will agree that she is probably the most loving, deeply spiritual person we know. So I get to Vicky's house, and in the course of our conversation, am deeply surprised to find out that she is a very strong supporter of Donald Trump.
Hmm.
Now, I'm sure
Hmm.
there are a lot of people listening to this who are also supporters of Donald Trump, and that's fine. But I had to look at my own shock, my own, because I
Hmm.
had this prejudice that anyone who's loving and spiritual would never support him. Well, obviously, I'm wrong about that. Uh, and instead of immediately jumping in and saying something like, "Vicky, how is this possible? You are such a loving, giving person. How could you possibly support this man and all the things that he's doing or the ways that he's acting?" Instead of doing that, I said, "Tell me more.
Hmm.
Let me hear why this is important to you." And she did. And she began to share. And we spent the next few days in a very deep conversation during which I was often triggered. Many
Mhm.
times I didn't necessarily agree, but I chose to listen. And in listening, I learned a lot. And this goes back to the title of the book. I mean, I don't know. I have my opinion, but I don't know for sure that my opinion is right. I need to relax into what I like to think of as the state of I don't know, and then say, well, maybe there's something I can learn. But my love for Vicky, my love for everyone is such that I'm willing to listen and to consider the possibility that there's more here that I can take in and learn from. So this is what the movement is all about. And once again, I encourage anyone who's listening to this to join us. If you're inspired by this, whether you're on the left or the right, in the middle somewhere, none of that matters. The only thing that really matters is, do you want to be part of the solution that brings us closer together rather than pushing us further apart?
Well, and I'm wondering, do you think that people from both sides of the political divide will be open to the message of this book?
Well, if I'm being realistic, I would say that people on the left side are probably going to be more engaged at first.
Mhm.
But I think that there is a momentum that is created that will welcome and include everyone. The thing for us to remember is that things aren't black and white. It's not like people on the left think this, people on the right think this. Usually, what happens is there's about a 5 or so% of people on the far left and about 5 or so% on the far right who have very, very strong beliefs that we're probably not going to be able to convince through reason alone. But
Mhm.
that means that there's a good 80% in the middle who may lean a bit more one way or the other, but are more open to not necessarily change their mind or change their beliefs, but to consider the possibility that we need to do this together. So I really do believe that this is something that is, I'll use the word bipartisan,
Mhm.
and something that includes everyone. But I do think that, like, and I could be totally wrong about this, and I hope I am totally wrong, thinking that it's going to be people more on the left who start this. Uh, that's just my own experience, but I think that it's really going to be about all of us finally getting the message that we're stronger together than we are apart.
Well, and I think there may come a point, James, when people on both sides are hurting so much and missing some of the relationships that have
Mm.
been fractured by this, that there becomes a higher need than being right. And maybe that need of community, and that need of being close to and in relationship with the other humans that we're missing, perhaps we'll begin to look for the answers to repairing
Hmm.
what we miss so deeply. And that would be bipartisan. I'm hopeful.
Absolutely. I'm
I'm so
hopeful as
hopeful.
well. And I want to point out that you, in that beautiful uh, 30 seconds that you just shared, basically said the title of the book.
Hmm.
You said, I don't know, but maybe this,
Hmm.
and if we could just do this and just show compassion to each other. And that's why I think the title of this book is so important, because
Hmm.
it literally is a formula for how we do come back together.
It is, because there's humility that's a part of it, to say I
Very
don't
important.
know. But the last part, the I love you part, being able to say that out loud to a friend or family member that you may not see eye to eye with is so powerful, because
Hmm.
in the end, that's what we want more than anything else. It's one of our first, social needs is love. And, when we're deprived of that, it hurts. And if
Hmm.
we can be the ones leading the charge saying, you know what, no matter what we think about politics or climate change or what have you, in the end, the most important thing is I love you. That that breaks down walls. That it's such a powerful formula.
I think that's what happened when I was with my father on my journey east. Is I just said to him, Dad, this doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is you're my father and I love you. We have different opinions, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on all these things, but we can agree that our relationship and our love is more important than all of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how did he respond to that, James?
Oh, okay, I guess so.
It may have taken a minute, but I bet it melted his heart.
Yes, I'm sure it did.
As you mentioned, your book follows a journey that you were taking, meeting people across the US. Besides the encounters that you've already described, are there any other meetings that kind of stand out in your mind that you'd like to share with us?
Well, two. The very first was when I decided to write the book, I was in a town called North Conway, New Hampshire. And this is right before the election. So there are political signs everywhere. And
Mm.
in this town, I was on my way to this cafe, and there's a man there who has a car just completely covered in Trump signs. And he's holding a sign that says, "Vote Trump or else." And he's just waving with great energy at all the cars that are passing. Half of them are honking in approval, the other one are waving the bird. And it just right there showed me how polarized we are. Well, as I'm sitting in the cafe writing the first chapter of the book, I thought, this is where I begin. I'm going to go have a conversation with this man. So I did. I walked out and I just said hello, and I think he could immediately tell that I was not in the same. I was not in alignment with his political beliefs,
Mm.
but he could also tell that I wasn't there to confront or change him. I just began asking questions. Once again, I was curious. Tell me why you believe this. Tell me more about your opinion on this. And lo and behold, he relaxed. And after he expressed his opinion, guess what he did? He asked me for mine. And this
Mm.
is this is one of the, I think, the real miracles is that
Hmm.
when we open up to people, they begin to open up to us. There is an organic energy of connection when we resist the urge to immediately correct, immediately try and change, and just be curious. Something happens, and it opens our hearts, the dialogue, all of it. The other situation that I remember was when I was once I had finished my musicals, I started driving all the way back to Portland. And I think I was in Nebraska, and I stopped at a truck stop, and I was just going to get a few hours sleep. And I went in. It was probably 1 in the morning, and the only other person in there was this really large, uh, I would even see dangerous looking trucker, and he was staring at me. And I thought, this is not good. And you're in the middle of nowhere, and this very interesting looking man is staring at me, and I tried to avoid it, but then he finally walked up and he said, "Are you James Twyman?" I thought, how in the world does this guy know who I am? It turns out his wife has read some of my books, and she's been watching some videos, and he recognized me. And we sat down. I called him Stan the Man because he was just this enormous guy. And it was one of the more delightful experiences and conversations that I had on that whole journey. And he had such powerful insights on our human nature and why we believe what we do and why we separate or join. And it just goes to show that unexpected uh, experiences happen when we open up just a little bit
Hmm.
and listen to the people that we might have been afraid of or that we might have wanted to push away, and instead just give them the space to be who they are.
I love that. So well said. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have so much more with James. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. So happy to have you all joining us with our guest, James Twyman. We're talking about his brand new book, and he's written 24 of them. So if you have some of his books on your bookshelf, yay, you, way to go, and add one more. And this book is called, I don't know, maybe. I love you. And it's all about depolarizing our families, our businesses, our country, our world, and coming back together, healing those divides. Um, James, what's the first thing that you would say to someone who has the opposite opinion about the causes of polarization?
I would say thank you for sharing your opinion. Tell me
Hmm.
more. I would open the door. Instead of my immediate feeling as a human being might be to maybe close that door or at least get behind it in case I need to close it quick. Uh, but to have the courage, even though I may feel, because we're all human, and we have similar feelings. So if someone were to come to me and have, let's use the immigration situation.
Hmm.
Let's say someone had a very, very strong opinion about immigration and kicking out people who aren't, American. One of the things I should say is that I live in and am doing this interview in Mexico.
Hmm.
That's where I live. So I obviously have a deep affection for the Mexican people. And if someone were to express a very different opinion, my first feeling may be to close. Well, what if I choose to open
Hmm.
wider and say, tell me more? Uh, how did you come to that belief? Uh, and once again, if I open the space for more dialogue, there's a very good chance that they're going to open the space to me. Maybe, maybe not. But at least we're not going to have this confrontational, you're wrong, I'm right energy.
Hmm.
We're going to maybe have a dialogue where we'll both learn something, whether it changes us or not. Like with my friend Vicky, it didn't change either one of us, but there was such deep respect and love that we shared that there was no need to change. It
Hmm.
was just more of a need to understand. And if we could cultivate that more in our relationships, in our country, and in the world, uh, then this is what depolarization is all about. Instead of pushing us apart, it's like a magnet and it pulls us back together. Because what we really want is that connection. What we really want is to get along with each other, no matter what our opinions are.
Hmm. I want to go back to something that, you mentioned, but I think there's more to unwrap there, and that is you were doing a musical about the life of Saint Francis of Assisi, who happens to be my favorite saint.
Hmm.
And I want to give you space to talk about any similarities you see between his time on the planet
Hmm.
and what we're living through right now.
Well, yes, there are some great similarities. France has lived in the 13th century at a time of great division, of really very deep polarization. And at that time, city-states would go to war with each other. Assisi would go to war with Perugia, the neighboring town. The Crusades were raging out of control. And here comes this young guy who had been the rich popular kid who everyone wanted to party with, and he gets thrown into prison during one of the wars and comes out a different person, and he realizes that there's something deeper that binds us together. And at one point, after many thousands of people began to join him, both men and women, uh, he heard so much about the Crusades. In fact, one day he heard that the great Sultan al-Kamil in Egypt, who was the leader of the entire Islamic world at that time, had said that he would give a Byzantine gold coin to any Muslim who brought him the head of a Christian.
Mm.
And whether that was true or not, as soon as Francis heard that, he said, that's where I'm going. He
Mm.
had the courage to say, I'm going to go visit the Sultan. And I just want to share with him what I feel to be the real message of Jesus, which is the message of love. Of
Hmm.
course, everyone told him, "You're crazy. You can't do that. You're going to be killed." But he was determined. So he and Brother Illuminato, one of the brothers, left and began this journey. It took them three different attempts to get there. And when Francis arrived at the fortress of Damietta, which is where the Muslim army was encamped, uh, to his surprise, he was welcomed in, and he discovered that this fearful sultan was actually a deeply spiritual man and wanted peace. And another man who was there at Damietta at the time was the Fakir al-Din al-Farisi, who was the greatest Sufi leader at that time. And the Sufis are very much like the Franciscans. They're kind of the ambassadors of peace in the Islamic world. And
Hmm.
Francis spent 2 weeks there with the Sultan and with the Sufi leader, learning about the Islamic faith. And they learned from Francis. And by the time Francis left, they had joined in some magical way. In fact, something really interesting happened a short time later. Uh, the Sultan did bring a an offer of peace to Cardinal Pelagian, who was the in charge of the Crusaders at that time. But of course, they wanted to crush the Muslims, and they won that battle. And then, as the Christian soldiers approached the Nile, if they were able to cross the Nile and get into the main part of Egypt, it would be over. They would be able to conquer everything and get to the Holy Land. And so here they are getting ready to cross the Nile. And the Sultan did something very interesting. He opened the floodgates of the Niles and he flooded the entire area where the Crusaders were, because they were in a lower area and they couldn't leave, they couldn't move their carts or their horses. Days and weeks went by and they began to they began to starve, they had no water. So, what did the Sultan do? He became more Christian than the Christians. He
Hmm.
sent his own soldiers in to feed and to care for the Crusaders.
Hmm.
What do you do then? The so-called enemy has completely depolarized this whole situation. So
Hmm.
once they were finally able to get out, the Crusaders just turned around and went home.
Wow.
And this was all because of Francis. And because the Sultan was so moved by his time with uh, this brother from Italy. It's interesting to realize that by the time Francis died in 1224, uh, a quarter of all of Europe were Franciscans.
Hmm.
Now, not monks or sisters, but primarily third order Franciscans, which were made up of the lay people.
Hmm.
And if you were a lay Franciscan, you had to take a vow of nonviolence, that you would not take up arms. So the entire feudal system began to dissolve because the barons and the leaders of all of these areas could not even raise an army anymore. In fact, I'll ask you a question and see if you can guess who said
Okay.
this. This was
Okay.
something that was said centuries later, but the quote is, if we had had 10 St. Francises, we would not have needed a revolution. Who do you think said that?
George Washington.
Good guess. A lot of people say Lenin,
Oh,
thinking it was John Lennon, but no, it was Vladimir Lenin.
oh my gosh. I had no
Vladimir
idea.
Lenin, who was an atheist, said that if they had had 10 people as dedicated to peace as Francis, they wouldn't have needed
Wow.
the Bolshevik Revolution. That shows the power of someone
Wow.
who is so committed. And I believe that if we had 10 St. Francises today, then we would not have this issue of polarization that we have. Maybe that's the solution. We just need people to commit themselves on a similar level.
Wow, that's powerful. And because we have someone to look to who did it before, we know it's doable. I
Hmm.
mean, sometimes you need a human example. And there you go. Wow, this is really, really powerful. And I think, one of the things that a lot of people are concerned about is that if they start this, they make themselves vulnerable. They start the difficult conversations, they have the humility. And what recommendations or advice do you have to people who are trying to get started with this, trying to wade into the waters, but are afraid of being hurt even more deeply or being more vulnerable?
I had a friend, I used to live in Ashland, Oregon, and I had a good friend there who tried to start a movement that he called Take an Idiot Out to Lunch Day. And I'm not sure the title itself was helpful, but the idea was go find someone who has a different opinion than you and take them out to lunch and just listen to them. And so what I would say is similar. Go find
Hmm.
someone who may disagree with you, or maybe they are, more left or more right than you are, or have a different belief or supported a different candidate. And instead of pushing them away, welcome them in. Take them
Mm,
out for lunch or coffee and say, tell me what you believe. Tell me why this is important to you. We keep coming back to the practice of curiosity. Be
mhm,
curious and resist the urge to if they say something that just really gets you, take a deep breath
mhm,
and don't rush in. Just calmly have a discussion.
mhm,
And I think what you'll find is, once again, there's more that connects us than disconnects us. And
mhm.
if we just start to listen to each other and respect one another, then something magical can start to happen. So I would say that's the first step is go take someone out who has a different opinion than to you and then just listen to them.
I believe that's powerful. I do. I think that's great advice. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but we have more. So don't go away. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. Our guest today is James Twyman, and we're talking about his brand new book called I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You. And we're talking about depolarizing our world, our country, our families, and our workplaces. Um, James, some people might say that polarization is inevitable in a diverse society. How would you respond to that?
It is. I think that's correct, and that's healthy. That there's nothing wrong with having a diverse range of opinions and feelings. What's not healthy is when we villainize the people who think differently than us, when we just
Mhm.
immediately push them away because they don't share the exact same opinion that we do. As we said before, we have a tendency to gather around us only the people who agree with us because that strengthens our position. It strengthens my belief that I'm right and everyone else is wrong. Because look, all these cool people who hang around me they have the same opinion that I have.
Mhm.
But we need to expand further. We need to open up our arms a little wider so we can just listen to other people and consider the possibility that maybe there's something more to learn. Maybe I don't know everything I can possibly learn at this point. And if I begin with realizing that I don't necessarily know the answer to every question.
Hmm.
And every opinion that I have may or may not be correct. There's a story. I think you said something about it even before the interview of when I was finishing writing this book. I
Hmm.
was I was at a little cabin that I own about an hour and a half from here in a town called Mazatitla. And I mean, this just goes to show that I'm wrong all the time. We all are. And it's if we can laugh at it, we're so much better off. So what happened was I have a very large bathtub, and just the day before I had filled it up with hot water and had a good soak. And so I get into the bathtub the next day. I turn on the water, and I'm waiting for it to get hot. It never gets hot. So I go check. Well, there's gas. So I don't know what's wrong. Maybe there's not enough gas. I called my manager. She came out and had the guy fill up more. Still no hot water. I called her up again and said, I don't know what's going on. I just can't get. And then I thought, wait, let's try the other faucet. And of course, I had turned the wrong. I had turned on the cold water, thinking for sure I knew which was which, and I
Hmm.
was wrong. Suddenly, I
Yep.
had hot water. Well, if we can laugh at something like that, and if we can laugh at all the other things that we think we're so right about, and just consider maybe there's more here for me to learn. I think we're
Hmm.
going to get a lot further. We're going to come closer together because there are times when we're all right and there are times when we're all wrong. And what we need to do is listen to each other, especially
Hmm.
to the people who have different opinions than us. And if we
Hmm.
can do that and just welcome everything in, love begins to grow, separation begins to dissolve, and we find ourselves not being pulled in two different directions, but coming closer and closer together. That's what I'm hoping this depolarizing movement's going to do.
Well said. And I'll add one more thought. You know, it could be that your opinions are right and that you do know the truth. You
Hmm.
do know the facts. But by listening to someone with another line of thinking, even if it, literally is wrong, you still can learn something you don't know about the person. What,
Yes,
and that in and of itself is a quest worth cultivating. What can I learn about a family member who disagrees with me about matters of climate change? What can I learn about what they're afraid of or what they need or things I didn't know that frame their perspective on the world? And maybe you know the facts of the issue itself, but maybe what you don't know is all that you could about the person.
absolutely. That's a very good point. Because sometimes we are right. Often
Yep.
we are,
Objectively.
and I know it. I know I'm right about this. But still, to assert that to the degree that I'm ridiculing the other
Yeah.
person for being wrong, rather than just welcoming a deeper connection, uh,
Hmm.
that's going to be a much richer experience than just
It
basking
is.
in the fact that I'm right.
Exactly. Exactly. There's something more, like you said, on the other side of this pandemic of being right. I'm curious, James, have you encountered resistance to your message of depolarization? And if so, how do you handle those conversations?
I really haven't. I think this is pretty organic, and I think people are getting it now. Of course, the people that I live with, say here in Mexico, or my family and friends back in Oregon, they are pretty similar to me. So I don't live in an area, for example, where there's a deep polarization, uh,
Hmm.
and but what I have found is doing these interviews for the book and talking about the book that it's pretty universal that we are all looking for a solution. We're all
Hmm.
hoping to end this cycle of polarization. And the way I think of it is like a rubber band. If you have one side pulling it one way and the other side pulling it the other way, the tension of the rubber band gets greater and greater until it finally snaps.
Hmm.
Maybe that's what needs to happen. I don't know. Maybe.
Hmm.
And maybe the snapping of this entire thought system, that being right is more important than coming together, maybe that needs to snap. And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it'll be dramatic, maybe it won't. But I do think that if we can get a good committed group of people together who say, I want to be a part of this solution, I want to be a depolarizing agent. I want to help bring us closer together rather than push us further apart. If we can get a group of solid, committed people doing that, I think we're going to begin to see a dramatic change.
I agree. If some of our listeners are out there and they're just feeling overwhelmed or discouraged by the state of division in the world, what advice would you give them?
Hmm, good question. Commit. Make
Mhm.
a commitment to be part of the solution. Have courage. Be willing to have difficult, challenging conversations where even if you know you're right, you're still willing to listen and welcome other opinions and resist the urge to immediately correct and to join with people because it's in that joining that the miracle happens.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm curious, James, you're a holy man. So people probably, assume you come with, some kind of inner strength and resilience that maybe those of us that are lay people don't have. Is there work we need to do on ourselves? Is there something that we need in our own lives that will help us be effective depolarizing agents?
I would say that the work is always on ourselves, as opposed to thinking that the work is on other people. I
Mhm.
have to be willing to change my mind, and I have to be willing to do the work that I'm required to do to be even more deeply committed to this vision. Um, yeah, the way I look at it, I teach what I need to learn. So the more I share this message, the more I write about it and do interviews, the more I integrate it. And once again, if we just make it a practice of looking within rather than looking without, then we're going to get a lot further.
Agreed. Agreed. Well said, James. It has been such a pleasure having you on the show. I mean, I was telling you during the commercial break, sometimes I feel like we ought to let our listeners into the commercial break conversations because they're pretty awesome. We spend a lot of time on Go Green Radio talking about sustainability and climate change and droughts and natural disasters and things that are related to our environment. And sometimes we need to pause and heal, and we need to think about healing our world, and not just from an environmental protection standpoint, but also from a human standpoint.
Mhm.
And so it really has been wonderful having you on Go Green Radio and giving us some things to think about as we, go back out into our daily lives and deal with folks who don't necessarily agree with us. So thank you, James, for being on. Guys, get out there and check out his book. It's so good. It's called I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You. How to Depolarize Your Family, Business, Country, and the World. We'll be here same time, same place next week with more Go Green Radio. Until then, have a wonderful week and do something in your life